If there's one good thing to come out of the coronavirus pandemic, it's this. The IRS has pushed back tax day for a month, but May 17th will be creeping up on you before you know it. And if you're like most people, the tax changes over the past couple of years still have you stumped. Add to that new changes from the stimulus bill, and tax season becomes even more taxing. We'll help you sort it all out.
Stop Asian hate!
Stop Asian hate!
Also, the recent wave of hate crimes against Asian Americans is actually part of a grim and ugly history that dates back more than a century. We take a look as Fox 11 News In Depth starts right now. Welcome, everyone, to Fox 11 News In Depth. I'm Marla Tellez. I'm here for host Hal Eisner, who unfortunately is still out on medical leave. Of course, we will bring you an update on Hal's recovery in just a little bit. But first, let's start by talking a little bit about everybody's favorite subject, taxes. Normally, you'd be just days away from the income tax due date. But this year, all because of the pandemic, you have another month to figure things out. Joining us to talk about all the things you need to know is personal finance expert. Here she is, Bobbi Rebell. Welcome, Bobbi.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for tackling such an important topic, Marla.
Oh, yeah, it is that time of the year. I know a lot of people fear this year, but we have another 30 days to get our taxes in order unless...
Well, that is unless if you are self-employed, you still owe the self-employment tax. So it's important to get that going. And by the way, so many Americans are expecting refunds, and we can talk about why later on. Get your taxes filed if you think you might be getting a refund, because why should you wait to get your money?
We want that money. We want it now. It's hard-earned money. What if we have a stimulus check? If you got a stimulus check or more last year, do you have to pay taxes on that?
So this is the great news, Marla. The stimulus checks are not going to be taxable. And so that is great news. You were able to have that money. Hopefully you put it to good use and you can enjoy it without having to worry about paying taxes on that money, I should say. So it's good news for people who really needed that money in many cases.
And just a moment ago, you said that more and more Americans are actually getting refunds this year. Why is that?
Well, one of the reasons, and that's such an excellent question, is that Americans, for example, who received unemployment benefits. Normally, you have to pay tax on unemployment benefits, but this year they're getting a break. $10,200 of that is being allowed to be tax deductible. So many people did not expect that. They had that money, as they should, taken out of their unemployment checks. It's an option that you can choose, and you should choose if you receive unemployment, so you're not caught in a bind. But because of this unexpected tax break, many more people will be getting a tax refund or a larger tax refund than they would otherwise be expecting. So that's some good news in some tough times.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, what can you tell us about the recovery rebate credit? What's that about?
So that is such a great question. If you were eligible for a stimulus check and you did not get it, that is exactly what you need to file. It's part of your taxes. And with that, you will get the money that you are entitled to, because what the stimulus checks really were a tax credit that was simply forwarded to people. So it's a little bit complicated, but you'll get your money, and that's a good thing.
And you just alluded to what a tough time that we've all lived through. A lot of people took out PPP loans. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about that?
So there's good news there too. If your loan was forgiven, you don't have to pay taxes on it. And if you use the money, by the way, for expenses that would be tax deductible, you can also get a deduction there. So it's a little bit of help for so many businesses, especially small businesses, which is what the PPP loans were intended for. Small businesses who needed a break. This is a further break to kind of ease the burden, and hopefully they will enjoy part of the economic recovery that we're already starting to see in the U.S. economy.
In your opinion, is it a bad thing to get a refund?
Technically, it is a bad thing.
Why?
I think emotionally people feel good because what you've effectively done is you have given the IRS an interest-free loan by overpaying your taxes, which is what you're getting with a refund. You're getting the money back that you don't owe, that you never should have paid. That's money that you could have perhaps had invested. Or in this case, Marla, it would be great to have had that in your emergency fund. Even if you didn't have to use it, just the security of having a little more money there as a safety net would have been a great feeling for many people. So the goal when you're figuring out how much to pay of your taxes in advance is to really ideally maybe get a refund of $1, as little as possible, so that you're not giving the government this interest-free loan.
But isn't that such a fine line to walk, meaning that you don't want to end up paying a lot?
Right. You don't want to end up paying a lot. And so, as I said, the goal is to come in as close as possible as you can in estimating your taxes. You can learn a lot by looking at the past. But of course, as we just discussed, there's so many things that are unique to this year. If you do end up in a position where you do owe taxes, and especially if you can't pay it right away, it's really important to get in touch with the IRS. You can do it right on our app, IRS2Go, the number 2, IRS number 2, GO. It's a really easy to use app, and using that, it will get you to the right place where you can go on a payment plan. And I'm telling you, on a payment plan, you're going to pay a lot less in interest than you would if you, for example, threw it on a credit card or just ignored it, and then you're going to rack up penalties, and nobody wants that.
No, because then you end up paying even more. Am I the only one who didn't realize that the IRS has its own app? Of course it does.
It does. And also, I have to recommend, you're going to laugh, I am such a nerd, but the website, irs.gov, is really well done. It is very clear. There's a search bar, and they can answer so many of your questions. There's a lot of amazing resources. And by the way, for many Americans who qualify, generally having a household income of $72,000 or less, you can actually get free file. You can file your taxes with assistance for free. So check out irs.gov. This is not any kind of paid sponsorship. I just am a fan of their website, and they will put you, they'll give you the right information, and you can get a lot of resources that can be very helpful.
All right, I do have a question for our viewers out there who are watching and who took out a cash out refinance this year,
Yes.
right? So or last year, I should say. What do they need to know?
So I love that you are asking this question. This is often used to make improvements on a home. That is a good use of this money, because if you use a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, to make improvements on your home, the interest that you pay on that can be tax deductible, which is great news. The bad news is if you took it out and you didn't use it for that purpose, you're not going to be able to deduct it. But it is a really great option for people that did make a lot of home improvements when they were home during the pandemic, and maybe they spent money they would have spent on a vacation on their home. At least now you get a tax break on it, and you get to enjoy the amenities that you improved in your home.
Okay, I have so many more questions for you, including if you lived in more than one state this last year, how that affects taxes. Don't answer that just yet, because we're going to take a short break, and then we will be back with more about your finances and everything you need to know with Bobbi Rebell. Stay with us as Fox 11 News In Depth continues right after the break. We are back with financial expert Bobbi Rebell to talk about all the challenges we have with our personal finances. Bobbi, let's pick up where we left off. For those people who happen to live in more than one state this last year, how does that impact their taxes?
Well, it for sure makes it more complicated, because now you have to figure out the taxes for more than one state, maybe 2 or 3 states. Maybe you've moved around and you were working the whole time. It's complicated, and the odds are you're going to have to get a professional involved. Every state has different rules regarding reciprocity. So you may be able to work in one state, and that can be a credit towards the taxes you owe in another state. But some state combinations, no, they won't do that. You get taxed twice. That's rare, but it happens. So it's really important to get in touch with somebody that specializes in this and that can know what to do, so that you don't not pay the taxes and not file taxes in a state that you did do business in.
All right, 2020 also had a lot more people working from home, my husband included. His office building shut down for good, so now he is forever working from home. How does that factor in to taxes, home deductions, working from home deductions, no?
Right. So I like to believe this is going to be a moving target as it stands now. If you own a business and you therefore work for yourself, your work from home may likely be deductible. Many expenses that would normally be deductible because you run your business from your home, good news, they're deductible. But if you work for an employer, as your husband does, you may be out of luck, again, unless things change. And I wouldn't be surprised if things do change. But you used to be able to get something called unreimbursed business expenses, and you could expense them. So if you had to buy something for work that was clearly for work and your employer didn't reimburse you, you could get that, you could use that as a deduction on your taxes, with certain complications, of course. Unfortunately, that went away in the new tax rules that came out in 2017. And so now those are not deductible. And so you're kind of out of luck. what people should do is maybe go to their employers and ask if they can get reimbursed for all the money that they spent on creating a home office, or maybe talk to your legislators and see what progress is being made, because it is something that's being talked about, because people like your husband who are working from home and do have costs incurred with that, they should have, that should be considered on your taxes, in my personal opinion. And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
And if
I
not,
wouldn't be surprised if that changes.
And if not, as you said, be proactive and talk to your employer about this at the very least. Very good advice.
Absolutely.
What if you do get a refund? What should we be doing with that money?
Okay, the first thing I want everyone to do is beef up your emergency fund. We used to advise people 3 to 6 months, do what you can. And the truth is, that's not realistic for most people anyway. But let's aspire. Let's at least try. If you get the refund and your emergency fund is not at least 6 months, ideally more, because we've seen what can happen, really consider prioritizing good old-fashioned savings, okay? Once you've got that fully secure, then you might want to move to paying off what I would call bad debt. Credit card debt, for example. There's lots of apps that can help you do that. Tally is an app that can help you organize your debt in the most efficient way. It can organize paying everything off on time so that you never have late fees. Late fees, Marla, are a big issue because the number one thing that can hurt your credit score, which determines the interest rate that you pay for things that you want to borrow money for, big ticket items, the biggest thing that hurts your credit score is having those late payments of 30 days or more. They can take 100 points off your credit score in some cases, and you don't want that. So always make sure that your payments are on time. As I mentioned, Tally is a great app to make sure that happens. There's other ones out there. Mind those bills. Make sure you pay everything on time.
Right. So the credit card debt, we know that's bad debt, but there is such a thing as good debt.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, something like mortgages, that is good debt. Student loans, you're getting an education for it. That is good debt. That's okay to have. You want to be paying it down, of course, but you also want to say, okay, I've got that debt. It's under control. I'm making appropriate payments. The interest rate is not that high. Let me also make sure I'm taking care of my future. Put some money into investments, whether it's making sure that you're funding your retirement accounts, your 401k, what other retirement vehicles you have access to. Maybe it's an IRA, maybe it's a Roth IRA. Don't put your future on hold to make up for the debt that you had in the past. It's really important to do both at the same time.
Since we're talking about student loan debt, how are student loans impacted this tax season?
Well, if you were paying your student loan, as you probably were until March, maybe the end of March, the interest that you paid on your student loans is still going to be tax deductible. So that's the good news. Of course, if you were not paying down your student loans, if you were able to pause them, since you weren't paying them, you don't have any more interest to deduct. But if you had interest, still deductible.
Bottom line, let's just prioritize our money in terms of debt, credit cards, savings. Obviously, you're going to say savings is number one. But if you have that debt, which so many people do, your advice?
My advice, again, prioritize cash savings. At least you get to a level with an emergency fund that, knowing what happened in the past year, and you can look back at how your personal situation went in the last year, you know in your heart how well prepared or how not prepared you were. Be honest with yourself and be prepared should something like this ever happen. So I'm still going to go with prioritizing the savings, but then go to the bad debt. Make sure you use whatever service you want to automate it and get that under control. Automation is your friend because then you won't forget. Then it's automatic, obviously, and then move into investing and other things.
Bobbi, Rebell, you know your stuff. Thank you so much for educating us today on this Fox 11 News in Depth.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, coming up on Fox 11 News in Depth.
We've seen a recent surge in anti-Asian American hate incidents in the U.S. lately, but hate and discrimination against Asians is nothing new. We take a look back with our next guest, coming up after this.
Welcome back. As you know, there has been a rash of anti-Asian American crimes recently, from brutal attacks on elderly people to name-calling to the horrifying murder of 8 people in Atlanta, 6 of whom were Asian women. Joining us now is Susie Lon Castle. She's a professor at Cal State University, San Marcos, and one of the founders of the Ethnic Studies program there. She has done years of research on the Chinese in America. She's currently working on a lecture regarding the stereotypes of Asians in America. It's called The Hypersexualization of Asian Women in America, from Stereotype to massacre. So, Susie, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is such an important topic, an important conversation to have. So right away, I want to get your reaction to the horrific murders, as we just mentioned, in Georgia, in Atlanta, that we saw earlier in the year, and the fact that 6 of them, Asian women. This suspect is not being charged with a hate crime. Your reaction to that?
Disappointment and surprise, I think. I think Trevor Noah said it best when he talked about the Atlanta massacre the next night. He said this was entirely predictable. So if you know the history of discrimination against Asians, Chinese women in particular, then you know that incidents like this were bound to happen. And if we don't know our history, then I think there's nothing we can do to try to address or correct that distortion that we have in that history. So I'm really shocked that it continues not to be classified as a hate crime. And I hope that they will do more research and appropriately classify it.
Let's delve more into that history that so many people may not know. What's the number one thing, or top 3, have at it, what you want people to know about the history?
Well, I think it begins with the depression of wages for Chinese men. So when Chinese men first came to America in the mid-1800s, there was discrimination, economic discrimination against them. And it was so severe that they couldn't afford to bring their wives over. So it was a good deal for them to come to work for $1 a day, which was a lot more than the $3 to $5 a day they were making in China, but it was not enough to bring their wives. What that meant was we had 100, 200,000 Chinese laborers in the prime of their lives working in difficult manual jobs without their wives, without their women. So gangsters, Tong Chinese gangsters, then imported women. They bought, they kidnapped, they tricked women from China, and they brought them into America and then forced them into prostitution. So the visual that American society often had with Chinese women in Chinatowns was that they were all prostitutes. Now, of course, that wasn't true, but it was true that many, many of them were. Maybe even the large majority of women were forced into prostitution. So that hypersexualized stereotype stuck. And it's a stereotype that women even now are continuing to be classified in and dying from.
How do we overcome that?
I think the first thing is we have to realize our history. We have to know that Asian women aren't born any more or any less licentious or immoral than any other women. We've been classified that way through history. History has passed discriminatory laws against Chinese women, specifically with the idea that they were all prostitutes, which of course wasn't true. But once we understand the history and some of the injustice there, I think we can begin to dismantle it. And I think as women who live in Asian bodies or bodies that look Asian, we have to understand the way that our bodies carry the history of our nation, and we have to try to disassemble, disrupt the ideas that culture has placed on us. And only if we can do that can we be seen as truly human.
So in your opinion, then, you think that the hypersexualization of Asian American women is linked to something like we saw in Atlanta?
Absolutely. And I think what we saw was not only Asian bodies that were killed, right? 6 out of the 8 were Asian women, but they were also in an industry that tends to be hypersexualized, right? And there are historical reasons for that. Many would talk about the War Brides Acts in the mid-20th century as a hypersexualization 2.0 for Asian women, right? When America went international and had wars in Vietnam, had wars in Korea, and brought back many, many, many Asian women, the stereotype persisted. And it's a stereotype of Asian women as either dragon ladies who are licentious, immoral, diseased, crime-ridden, or lotus blossoms, those who are much more submissive but obedient, but equally hypersexualized. In both cases, they're seen to be more inhuman in the first case, and more expendable and submissive in the second case. So we have 2 centuries, essentially, the 19th century and the 20th century, where Asian women in America have been contextualized in these hypersexual ways, and we've been victimized, and we continue to be victimized and seen in those ways as a result.
And sadly, there are other stereotypes that the Asian American community deals with.
Right. I mean, we talk about yellow peril, of which this is one. And I think when I think about yellow peril, I think about yellow peril as an outsized fear. So there's more fear than the reality or the facts would allow for. And historically, that's taken place on three different domains: the economic threat, especially with Chinese coming in the 1800s, and then the disease threat. And originally it was cholera, right? There was an outbreak in San Francisco in 1849, 1850, but then it became smallpox, the plague, now COVID, right, in 2020. And the third domain is the immorality domain that the hypersexuality is associated with. So there's three different kinds of yellow peril in which Asians are often placed. And again, they're distortions. They're outsized fears. So I think our job is to try to get to the real facts, get to the information that can help us erase or disrupt those assumptions about us.
We have just a couple of seconds left, but Professor, to our viewers, what can they do to help?
Well, report, I would say, to those who are experiencing any kinds of aggressions or microaggressions, certainly report those to the Stop AAPI organization so that we have a better tracking. And talk. Let's talk to each other.
Professor Susie Lon-Castle, thank you so much. I'm happy I got to talk to you today.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be back with more Fox 11 News in depth right after the break. That's it for this week's Fox 11 News in depth. We thank you for being with us. Before we go, we do want to update you on Hal Eisner and his photographer, Joab Perez, who were struck by a suspected drunk driver and injured several weeks ago. As for Joab, he has been released from the hospital. He is recovering from a broken collarbone and broken ribs. He's undergoing physical therapy to help him get back to 100%. Hal, look at Hal. He is also recovering from his injuries in a rehab facility where he is retraining his injured leg and letting his broken ribs heal. He sent us these photos. He is progressing and making great strides every day so he can be back with us here very soon. We're thinking of you both. We miss you and we love you, sending you all the best. From all of us here at In Depth, thank you for being with us. Have a great week.